Hello everyone, this is Isaac White from the Crockett Tavern Museum here in Morristown, Tennessee. Now, I'm sure you're probably noting that my garb strikes you as odd in appearance because typically I'm dressed up to be like David Crockett. But if you recall, in our last video, we started focusing on a battle seldom talked about during the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Kings Mountain. And it's because of this that I only thought it proper to go ahead and break out the tricorn hat. And yes, of course, you know that I have already went ahead and stuck a feather in there, and I have named it Macaroni. But in our last episode, what we discussed was how the year 1780 was a dark year for the Patriot cause, with Benedict Arnold's treason, Washington's army suffering from starvation and freezing temperatures at Morristown, New Jersey, as well as the string of defeats that were delivered to the Americans by the British forces. Now, things were not always going the British way, to be sure, because this is evidenced by the disastrous defeat which was the Saratoga Campaign. And it was after the Saratoga Campaign that Lord George Germain convinced British Parliament that England should no longer send any more men or money to crush this rebellion. Now, interestingly enough, because of the failure of the Saratoga Campaign, this was just the incentive needed to convince our French allies to lend military and monetary aid to our cause. But because of the British decision to discontinue sending aid to the forces in America, Sir Henry Clinton seeks to ease the demands on his troops by shifting the focus of the war into the South. And he intends to do so by implementing what was called the Southern Strategy. Now, there were two parts to the Southern Strategy, the first of which was to, after establishing a foothold in the South, Sir Henry Clinton would head back up north, and then Cornwallis would advance from the north and Henry Clinton to the south. And their hope was to catch Washington in a pincher move and end the Revolutionary War. The second part of the Southern Strategy was to try and recruit as many loyalists in the backwoods as they could, and use them to supplement their forces in the South. This task was given to the command of a young 35-year-old major of the 71st Highland Regiment, Patrick Ferguson, who, although much to Cornwallis' chagrin, did quite a proficient job at recruiting these backwoodsmen. But despite the fact of the matter that in the South things were going very well for the British, well, they didn't realize that there was an undercurrent of resistance in the backwater countries of the frontier. And this was born of depredations borne upon the backs of Tarleton and his dragoons, especially after the Battle of Waxhaws. When news of the Waxhaws massacre had reached the settlements, the deeply religious communities were appalled. And they realized that although they thought themselves previously far removed from the conflict, they couldn't have been more wrong, because now the enemy was coming to their doorstep. Because of this, previously unconcerned people began to reunite these discontinued militias, including Isaac Shelby, who would later go on to play a very important role in this upcoming battle. Now, Isaac Shelby and his militia, as well as the rest of the militia in the backwoods, their main goal was to go ahead and harass British forces, cut their supply lines, and cut down their forces at every creek crossing between here and the north. And although Cornwallis enjoyed a string of victories along his way to north towards North Carolina, well, the Americans ensured that every foothold the British had gained in the Carolina frontier was tenuous at best. And finally, after delivering a small but meaningful string of defeats to the British, it was at the Battle of Musgrove's Mill where a stinging defeat was given over to Patrick Ferguson, which so incensed him that he sent a prisoner of war named Samuel Phillips to the overmountain communities with a letter that would ultimately seal his fate. In this letter, Ferguson says that if you do not desist your opposition to the British arms, I will march my army over the mountains, hang your leaders, and lay waste the country with fire and sword. Folks, this was exactly the sort of threat that was needed to motivate the overmountain men. And sure enough, after riding the 40 miles to meet up with John Sevier, a leader of the Nolichucky and Watauga River settlements, they passed along word to all the communities throughout the country and asked that the militia would gather at the Sycamore Shoals near Fort Caswell, or as we more commonly refer to today, Fort Watauga. Now, as these men are pouring out of the hills and hollers, resembling more of a gathering of the Highland clans as opposed to gathering a militia, we see that on September 25th, the people are gathering at the Sycamore Shoals under the command of John Sevier, Isaac Shelby, William Campbell, and Charles McDowell. And by the time that they had finished gathering, before they went to the Carolina frontier, They numbered over 1,000 strong. Now, interestingly enough, there was this one particular patriot who assembled at Fort Watauga, and his name was John Crockett. Yes, that very same David Crockett who fought and died for Texas independence had a father who fought in the American Revolution for our independence. And this is evidenced by one of the first chapters in his autobiography from 1834, when David Crockett mentions that not only was his father a veteran of the Revolutionary War, but that he also took part in many campaigns, including the Battle of Kings Mountain, to fight against the British and the Tories. But with John Crockett and his brothers, as well as the other some 1,000 strong assembled there at Sycamore Shoals, would those numbers be enough to defeat the well-trained, well-disciplined forces of Patrick Ferguson? Only time would tell. Well, folks, this concludes another Fun Fact Friday episode for us here at the Crockett Tavern Museum in Morristown. As always, we want to thank you for following along on Facebook and YouTube, and please stay tuned for our Tourist Tuesdays for upcoming events that we're going to be having here on the property, as well as staying in tune with our Fun Fact Fridays. But of course, the best means of support is not online, it's by coming out here to pay a visit to the Crockett Tavern Museum. Our hours of operation, as well as admissions, will be listed in the description attached to the video. So with that being said, folks, until next week, this is Isaac White signing off for now, saying goodbye and God bless.